Get ready for the countdown. 10.
Coming in at number 10, we have Blaziken, the dual fire and fighting type Pokemon. Blaziken's pre-evolution Torchic is what you would originally choose in Emerald, Ruby, and Sapphire as the fire type starter Pokemon. As we all know, the starter Pokemon in Pokemon Go aren't always necessarily the most useful Pokemon. Blaziken, however, will be pretty useful. Blaziken enters the game with a max CP stat of 2,631. It isn't necessarily crazy high, however, Blaziken's attack stat is what is going to make it so useful. This guy has an attack stat of 240, which is better than Charizard and Typhlosion. However, its defense and stamina stats hold it back as a gym defender, coming in at only 141 and 160. If you want him to last in battle, you're going to need pretty good dodging skills. So hopefully Niantic will continue to work on the gym glitches that we all know about. Blaziken's ability in the main series game was called Blaze. What this ability does is it boosts fire type attack moves when this Pokemon is in trouble. So basically what this means is when Blaziken's HP gets low, its fire type attack moves are going to get a boost. All in all, Blaziken's going to be a really good attacker, especially with its fire and fighting type dual movesets. However, in Pokemon Go, since we only get 2 moves, I recommend having one Blaziken with only fire type moves and maybe one Blaziken with only fighting type moves. That's if you're even lucky enough to get 2. I myself don't live in a fire biome, so there are almost never any fire Pokemon where I live. I will be moving here at the end of this month, so hopefully the area that I'm moving to has more fire type Pokemon. Because Blaziken overall is my all-time favorite fire type Pokemon. So obviously I'm going to want a couple of them. Now let's move on to number 9. Coming in at number 9, we have probably one of the coolest designs, in my opinion, in Pokemon history. I just really feel like they nailed it on this design. This is Armaldo, the rock Bug-type Pokemon. In the main series game, the only way you could obtain this Pokemon is through fossil regeneration, which made this Pokemon fairly rare and pretty hard to get. So I can only naturally assume that he won't be the easiest Pokemon to find in the wild, or at least its pre-evolution Anorith. Armaldo is going to come into the game with a max CP of 2,675, with a pretty good attack of 222, a defensive stat of 183, and a stamina of 150. Now it'll be interesting to see how people end up using Armaldo in Pokemon Go. Will people use it mainly as an attacker? Will they use it mainly as a defender? That's up to you guys. However, at this point in the game, defending a gym doesn't really mean all that much. So basically it's going to be up to you guys as preference on whether you want to use Armaldo in the game. Armaldo has the ability called Battle Armor. In the main series games, this prevented the Pokemon from taking critical hits. We don't have anything like critical hits in Pokemon Go, so it'll be interesting should abilities be implemented by Niantic, how this ability would come into fruition. Time for number 8. Landing at the number 8 spot, we have a fighting type Pokemon, which is actually pretty nice considering we don't have a lot of good fighting types in the game. Basically, all we have are Machamp. So it's going to be really nice to see Hariyama implemented. Hariyama's going to enter the game with a max CP of 2,765. He's going to have a pretty good attack stat of 209, a not so great defensive stat of 114, and a really good stamina stat of 288. So what this Pokemon lacks in defensive ability, it makes up for in the fact that you're going to have to hit it a crap load of times before it finally faints. Hariyama has access to 2 abilities. However, and I'm not sure if I explained this earlier, a Pokemon can only have 1 ability at a time, and it's born with that ability. So the first ability Hariyama has access to is Thick Fat. This is the same ability we talked about earlier with Walrein, so I'm not going to go over that again. However, Hariyama's second ability that it can have is called Guts. This ability boosts Hariyama's attack stats when it's suffering from a status condition. Status conditions like poison, paralysis, etc. We don't have status conditions in Pokemon Go, so it'll be really interesting to see how this could be implemented into the game. I think Niantic's just going to have to give us a little more, and they're going to have to give us some kind of status condition. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'd be down. Let's keep moving forward on to number 7. Step aside Squirtle and Totodile because Mudkip is here. Well, Mudkip's final evolutionary stage, Swampert, is here. For those that don't know, Mudkip is your water starter type Pokemon from the Generation 3 games. And its final evolution, Swampert, is the best starter you could pick out of these games. Now that's actually not just my opinion, there's some stats which is why it landed so far forward on this list. First of all, let me start out with the fact that Swampert has great typing, being a water and ground type Pokemon. This typing now allows Swampert to negate electric type attacks, meaning it won't take any damage from them. Well, it'll still take damage in Pokemon Go, but it'll be 4 times resistant, so it'll be good. This typing also allows Swampert only to be weak to Grass-type Pokemon. So hey, for those of us who love Grass-type Pokemon, we now have something to use it on. Swampert. Swampert's going to have a max CP of 2,815. Swampert is also going to have a pretty good attack of 208, a pretty good defensive stat of 175, and a good HP of 200. This is going to make Swampert a good attacker and defender. However, at this point in the game, obviously there's a lot of high tier attackers and high tier defenders above Swampert, so its usefulness is going to come down to personal preference. I personally am going to be using my Swampert a lot just because I really like Swampert, but that's just my opinion. I'm sure there are people out there that hate Swampert. Those people are wrong. Swampert comes with the ability called Torrent. This ability is a lot like Blaziken's ability. However, in a pinch, when Swampert is suffering, its water type moves are going to get a boost in attack. I feel like I'm sensing a trend here. In conclusion, Swampert's going to be a great Pokemon, and I can't wait for its induction into Pokemon Go. Now it's time to move on to number 6, which just happens to be my all-time personal favorite Pokemon, Gardevoir, which if you listen to it really closely, sounds a lot like God of War, which is exactly what this Pokemon will do to you. Okay, that might have been a bit of an exaggeration. However, this Pokemon, I love it. It's my favorite. Gardevoir is going to come to the game with a max CP of 2,964. And I know Niantic doesn't do stat boosts, however, I really wish that they could just nudge it over 3,000, that would just be fantastic. Gardevoir is going to have an attack of 237, a defense of 220, and an absolutely horrendous stamina stat of 136. Obviously, that's a pretty horrible stamina stat. However, its attack stat and pretty decent defensive stat hopefully will make up for it with good dodging skills. And honestly, for me personally, just looking at this guy, I really feel like it could have been a legendary Pokemon. I mean, it's so majestic. Gosh, I love it. I love it. Absolutely love it. Now let's talk about Gardevoir's amazing typing. A Psychic Fairy type. This is going to be the #1 counter to Dragonite and the best Dragon-type Pokemon coming out of Pokemon Go in Generation 3, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Assuming you have 2 Fairy-type moves. Obviously, it's a bit of a glass cannon. However, with 2 Fairy-type moves, it's going to make quick work of any Dragon-type Pokemon you put it in front of. Gardevoir has access to 2 different abilities. The first is called Synchronize. Basically, this ability passes on status effects to the foe. So in the main series game, if Gardevoir was paralyzed, its foe would also then become paralyzed. This ability is why I always loved Gardevoir growing up and carrying on into today, because no matter what, the playing field is always going to be even. Let's say a Jolteon paralyzes your Gardevoir, well, with Synchronize, that Jolteon also becomes paralyzed. It's the Pokemon version of giving something its own medicine. And when I battle my friends, well, they always hated that. Now let's talk about Gardevoir's second ability, Trace. This ability allows Gardevoir to copy its foe's ability. So let's say Gardevoir is attacking a Pokemon that has the ability Intimidate. So guess what? Gardevoir now has the ability Intimidate. Once again, this ability is basically just an even playing field. You're going to cut my Gardevoir's attack, well, I'm going to cut yours. Anyways, I'm sure you guys are sick of me talking about Gardevoir, so let's move on to number 5. The 5th spot on this countdown belongs to Milotic. Now, when I think Milotic, not necessarily just looking at it, but also stat-wise, it reminds me a lot of Gyarados. However, Milotic is only a water type. It's going to come in with a max CP of 2,967, which is about 300 lower than Gyarados. Its attack is also much lower than Gyarados, coming in at only 192. Defensively, however, is where Milotic really makes a statement. It's going to have a defensive stat of 242, which absolutely blows Gyarados out of the water. HP-wise, they both have an equal stat of 190. Obviously, this makes Milotic the much better Pokemon defensively, and Gyarados the much better Pokemon offensively. So if you're going to put one of them in a gym, definitely drop in Milotic. This Pokemon also has access to 2 abilities. Its first ability is called Marvel Scale, which ups its defense when the Pokemon is suffering. As you can tell, even its first ability is geared towards the defensive end. Its second ability is called Competitive. In the main series game, this boosts its special attack when any other stat is lowered. We don't have a special attack stat in Pokemon Go. In the main series games, there were several other stats like special defense that also weren't included in Pokemon Go. However, should Niantic one day decide to make this game a little bit more complicated, hopefully those stats will be added into the game. However, as the game sits right now, I don't see that ability ever coming to Pokemon Go. That's about all I have to say on Milotic, so let's go on to number 4. The number 4 spot on this list goes to Aggron. Aggron is a rock steel type Pokemon, and it's going to be the first Pokemon on this list to reach above 3,000 CP, coming in at 3,004. CP. Being a dual Rock Steel type Pokemon, I'm sure I already know what you're thinking. This guy is going to be a beast defensively. If you were thinking that, ding ding ding, you are correct. This guy is a beast defensively. In fact, Aggron has the 4th highest defensive stat in the entire game of Pokemon Go. What is this stat, you might be asking? 314. However, it doesn't have a great stamina stat, coming in at only 140. Its attack stat isn't necessarily mind-blowing, but it is pretty decent and usable, coming in at 198. This guy's going to be weak to only ground and fighting type Pokemon. So if you like Hariyama, and now you have one, well, here's your chance to use it. This Pokemon also has access to 2 separate abilities. Its first ability is called Sturdy, which negates one-hit KOs. One-hit KOs aren't a thing in Pokemon Go. I guess unless you have like a Vaporeon with Hydro Pump and it's about to one-hit KO him, then I guess maybe I could see it being used there, but probably not. What we're most likely to see is its second ability called Rockhead, which prevents recoil damage. In the main series Pokemon games, recoil damage comes from attacks like Takedown that not only hurt the foe, but hurt the attacker as well. However, in the main series games, Takedown was a great move to have, considering that Aggron can't take that recoil damage. So this is actually an ability I could see implemented into the game with the introduction of moves that deal recoil damage like Takedown. There's not really a whole lot else to talk about Aggron other than the fact that it looks really cool. But good looks only get you so far, especially in Pokemon Go. So let's move on to number 3. Step aside Dragonite, because coming in at number 3, we have Salamence, the new best Dragon-type Pokemon. Salamence is going to come in with about the same CP as Dragonite, being 3,532. However, what sets Salamence apart from Dragonite is its attack stat being 14 points higher, coming in at 277. It's not quite as good defensively, coming in with only a stat at 168. However, it has 8 points higher of a stamina stat, coming in at 190. So basically, this is going to be Dragonite 2.0. If you're not convinced, even its secondary stage, Shelgon, is usable with a CP stat of 1958. Salamence is going to come to the game with the ability Intimidate, which we talked about earlier, which automatically cuts its foe's attack. Overall, this is going to be a fantastic Pokemon, and one that everybody is going to be sprinting towards if they happen to see one in the wild. But it's Pokemon like these in Generation 3 that I've been holding my rare candies for. Now time for number 2. Arriving at our number 2 spot, we have the Iron Leg Pokemon, Metagross. Now if we're talking specifically Generation 3, this is my second favorite Pokemon. I mean, just look at it. It looks fantastic. Not only does it look fantastic, it also has fantastic typing and fantastic stats. This is a Psychic Steel-type Pokemon, which is really great typing. Sure, it'll be weak to Ground, Fire, Dark, and Ghost, but other than that, it's going to resist a lot of stuff. However, if you see a Tyranitar, definitely hide your Metagross. His CP stat is going to come in at 3,644, with an attack stat of 257, a defensive stat of 248, and a stamina stat of 160. Overall, those are really good stats, which is probably why it's number 2 on this list. Metagross's ability is called Clear Body. This prevents its stats from being lowered. So for instance, if it's Salamence versus Metagross, Salamance's Intimidate will render useless. It's not gonna work. You can't cut Metagross's attack, or any of his other stats for that matter. My only recommendation for this Pokemon is, if you see a Beldum, go get it and Pinap that thing. Now let's get serious for a moment. All the Pokemon I've mentioned on this list are going to be fantastic, and each and every one of these Pokemon is going to be very usable within the game. Now, as I mentioned on some of these Pokemon like Swampert, there are other Pokemon that could take this place, so it's going to be down to player preference. However, the Pokemon landing at the number 1 spot, it has no preference. Its only job is to kick and take names. By this time, I'm sure you already know what I'm talking about. The king of loafing, Slaking. Slaking is very possibly the laziest Pokemon you will ever meet. That is, if you're lucky enough to meet one. Now, if you don't know at this point, I'm sure you're asking why all the hype. Let me spit it to you straight. This Pokemon has a max CP of 5,441, with an attack stat of 319, a defensive stat of 201, and a stamina of 300. Those stats are mind-blowing. So I'm sure you're wondering why this Pokemon isn't the most talked about Pokemon in any Pokemon game ever besides Legendaries. Well, that's because in the main series games, this Pokemon's ability was called Truant. And unlike all the other abilities we've mentioned previously, this ability doesn't help the Pokemon. In fact, it actually hinders its ability. Slaking was such a powerful Pokemon that Game Freak decided it needed an ability to cut it. So Truant only allows Slaking to attack every other turn. Now I have a feeling that if abilities aren't implemented, Niantic is simply going to nerf this Pokemon down. I, however, think that would be a huge mistake. I feel like this would be the easiest ability for Niantic to implement into the game. Basically, I feel all they would need to do is slow down Slaking's attack speed, make it twice as slow as the other Pokemon. However, if Niantic doesn't add abilities in, at least not right away, again, which we'll talk about at the end of the video, they definitely probably need to nerf it down a little bit, because that's just unreal. This makes its CP higher than Mewtwo. Mewtwo, literally the clone of Mew. It's ridiculous that it has such a high CP. However, I absolutely love it, and I can't wait to battle one in a gym, alongside of having my own to place in gyms. So if you see a Slakoth at a Pokestop near you, I recommend you sprint there, because you're really not going to want to miss out on something this powerful.